The chains were never meant to hurt her, they were meant to erase her. Briella Finch sat on the cold stone floor of her family's cellar, iron links around her wrists, altar drums pounding through the floorboards above her head, and understood something with quiet, terrible clarity. Her mother had not done this out of hatred. She had done it the way you bolt a door before guests arrive, not with anger, but with convenience. Briella was a complication. Tonight, Pearl was simplifying. What Pearl did not know, as she smoothed Lydia's dress and sent her twin to stand at the altar in Briella's place, was that you cannot fool a wolf's nose with a borrowed face. Alpha King Harris had already caught Briella's scent the moment he crossed the territory line. He just did not know yet that she was directly beneath his feet. There was a photograph on the mantelpiece of the Finch house that Briella had looked at every day for as long as she could remember. Two little girls at the edge of a forest, 8 years old, maybe 9, same dark hair, same wide brown eyes, same small gap between their front teeth. They were laughing at something outside the frame, and they were holding hands, and if you had studied that photograph for an hour, you could not have told, not from the image, not from any image ever taken of them, which one was Briella and which one was Lydia. For a long time, that was the truest thing Briella knew about herself, that once she and her twin had been exactly equal, that the only distance between them was the space between two palms. Then their father died, and the distance became something you could fall into and never touch the bottom of. Roland Finch had been a pack beater, not the strongest wolf in the territory, not the highest ranked, but the most trusted. He had a way of making every person in a room feel like the most important one in it. People followed him not because they were told to, but because being near him made them want to be better. He had warm hands and a quiet laugh, and he always smelled like cedar wood and something sweet, and Briella had inherited his instincts and his stubbornness and his belief, deep and unshakable, that the moon goddess never made a mistake when she chose a person's mate. He died in a border skirmish 2 weeks before the girl's 15th birthday. A territorial dispute that should have been resolved in a meeting room ended in a forest clearing at midnight, and Roland Finch went in as a mediator and came back in the bed of a pack vehicle with his hands folded and the light already gone from his eyes. Briella sat beside him for 2 hours after they brought him home. She did not speak. She just held his hand and waited for something she already knew was not coming back. Later, she would think of those 2 hours as the last time she had felt truly safe in the world. Pearl was dry-eyed at the funeral. Briella noticed that and filed it away in the quiet part of her mind where she kept things she did not yet know what to do with. The changes in the house began gently, the way all permanent things do. Pearl had been functional during Roland's lifetime, not tender, not warm the way some mothers were, but present, reliable in the way a wall is reliable. After Roland died, something shifted behind her eyes, and Pearl became a woman with a plan. The plan was Lydia. Lydia was beautiful in the way that always gets noticed, symmetrical and deliberate, with a quality of stillness that made people watch her the way they watch a candle flame. She could walk into a room and something in the air changed. Pearl saw this and started building on it the way you build on solid ground, carefully and with intention. New dresses before every pack gathering. Long private conversations after dinner about which families mattered, which alphas were rising, which opportunities were worth positioning for. Briella was not included in those conversations. She told herself for a full year that she did not need them. Then she stopped lying to herself and saw the truth plainly. Pearl was not building Lydia's future. She was building a future with no space for Briella in it at all. It happened slowly enough that Briella nearly missed it. Her meals came after Lydia's. Her clothes were whatever remained when Pearl had finished shopping for her sister. At pack gatherings, Pearl placed her at the back of the group so Lydia has room to be seen, as if Briella being visible was a problem to manage. She stopped shifting in public because Pearl said it made Lydia look ordinary by comparison. She stopped speaking first because Pearl said it dominated conversation. She ironed Lydia's dresses and braided Lydia's hair, and sat across from her at the kitchen table, playing the role of whichever alpha Lydia needed to rehearse impressing that week. It was a strange kind of loneliness, the kind that grows in a crowded house, in plain sight, where no one can see it because you have learned to wear it quietly. But she had never stopped believing in the mate bond. That was the one thing Pearl could not reach. Her father had told her about it early, sitting with her on the back porch one evening when the moon was full and the forest was making its night sounds all around them. He had told her that every wolf carried a golden thread from birth, and that one day, on a sacred ceremony night, when the moon pulled the threads taut, she would feel it come alive. She would feel it lead her toward the person who completed her. "What if I miss it?" she had asked him. She had been 10 years old and worried about everything. Roland had smiled. "You won't, the bond doesn't miss, and neither will he." She had believed that then. She still believed it, 22 years old, and standing in front of the small mirror in her plain room on the morning of the altar ceremony, smoothing the white dress she had kept folded in tissue paper for 3 years. The thread in her chest was already moving, already reaching. Something was close, something that had always been meant to be close, and for the first time in a very long time, Briella let herself feel the particular warmth of hope. She walked out of her room, and directly into the end of everything she thought she had. Pearl called both girls to the sitting room at mid-morning. She was already arranged in her chair when they arrived, dressed too carefully for the time of day, her hands folded in her lap. Briella noticed the details the way she always noticed Pearl's details, the slight elevation of her chin, the deliberate placement of everything in the room. Pearl only set a stage when she intended a performance. "Sit down," Pearl said pleasantly. "I have something to tell you both." She told them about the Alpha King last, the way you save the most important information for the moment when the listener is already off balance. She began with the ceremony details, the time, the witnesses, the protocol. Lydia listened with practiced interest, the kind that meant she already knew everything being said. Briella felt the thread in her chest flutter with something she could not name yet. Then Pearl said his name. Harris. Not a regional alpha, not a pack leader from a neighboring territory. Alpha King Harris, ruler of all wolf territories, the man whose word shaped the laws every pack in the land lived by. The man whose mate, when found, would become Lunar Queen of the entire supernatural world. The golden thread in Briella's chest did not flutter this time. It lurched. A single, violent pull toward the ceiling above her head, toward whatever direction the territory's entrance lay, so strong that she pressed her hand flat against her ribs, without meaning to. Pearl's eyes moved to that hand, and then away again. Something careful passed across her face. "Your Majesty is attending our pax ceremony personally," Pearl continued, her voice smooth and even. "It is a great honor, and I have decided that Lydia will represent this family at the altar tonight." The room went very quiet. Briella's voice, when it came, was steadier than she expected it to be. "Mother, the altar ceremony is for every eligible wolf in the pack. I am eligible. I have been preparing." "I know what you have been preparing," Pearl said, still pleasant, still perfectly arranged. "And I understand what you feel you deserve, but this is not about what you deserve, Briella. This is about what is best for this family." "The bond," Briella said. Her voice was still steady, but her hands were not. She pressed them together in her lap. "I can feel it, Mother. I have felt it all morning. My mate is coming tonight, if I am not at the altar." "Feelings," Pearl said softly, "are not strategy." She turned her gaze to Lydia, who was sitting with her ankles crossed and her eyes on the middle distance, and something passed between them that made Briella's chest go cold. "Lydia will attend the altar tonight. You and Lydia share a face. The Alpha King has never seen either of you. He will not know the difference. And Lydia is everything a king needs, composed, gracious, prepared." "And I am not?" Briella asked. Pearl looked at her, not unkindly. That was somehow the worst part. "You are your father's daughter," she said, "stubborn and too clever for your own good, and incapable of letting a room lead you. Those things had their place when Roland was alive. They have no place in the life I am building now." Briella stood. "I am going to that ceremony." She got as far as the hallway. The 2 men Pearl had hired, she found out later they were from a border pack, people who owed Briella nothing and Pearl a week's wages, were already positioned. She had not heard them arrive. She had not heard anything, because she had been in her room all morning with hope wrapped around her like a coat, and hope makes you careless about the sounds a house is making. She did not go down without a fight. She was Roland Finch's daughter, and she had her father's stubbornness and a wolf that was stronger than Pearl had ever given it credit for. But there were two of them, and the hallway was narrow, and Pearl had planned this with the quiet precision of someone who had been thinking about it for a long time. The cellar stairs were cold. The cellar itself was colder. The chains were not improvised. That was the thing that hit Briella hardest, not the iron itself, not even the dark, but the realization, as her eyes adjusted and she made out the bracket bolted into the stone wall, that those rings had been installed deliberately. The metal was new. The bolt was clean. Someone had come down here and drilled into this wall with the specific intention of holding her here tonight. Pearl had planned this weeks ago. She had stood in this cellar and planned it, and then walked back upstairs and sat at the dinner table and asked Briella how her day had gone and listened to the answer. And Briella had talked, and Pearl had nodded, and neither of them had known, or one of them had known, and one of them had not, that the chains were already waiting. The last thing Pearl said before the cellar door closed was not cruel. It was almost gentle, which was the most devastating thing it could have been. You were always a complication, Briella. Tonight, I am simplifying. The bolt slid home. The footsteps retreated. The drums above started not long after, and Briella was alone in the dark with the most important night of her life happening 3 floors above her head. The first hour, she fought. She tested every link of the chain with both hands methodically, starting from the wall bracket and working outward. She was a strong wolf, stronger than Pearl had wanted anyone to notice, but the iron was new and solid, and the bolt was deep in the stone. She screamed until her throat felt like the inside of a chimney. She kicked the underside of the cellar door until her foot ached. She pressed her face to the gap at the bottom of the door and screamed again, and heard the altar drums start above her head, and understood that no one in that house was listening for her voice. The thread in her chest was frantic now. It pulled so hard she had to press both fists to her sternum just to breathe around it. Her mate was close, not just in the territory, close, inside the house, maybe, or nearly. She could feel the approach the way you feel weather coming, a pressure change in the air, a shift in everything. And she could not get to him, she could not get out. The second hour, she stopped screaming. She sat down on the cold floor with her back against the wall and let herself be still. The drums above had settled into a slow, beautiful rhythm. She could hear voices too, soft and indistinct, the sounds of a ceremony she should have been at. And underneath all of it, she could feel the thread pulling and pulling and pulling, and the effort of resisting it, of not being able to follow it, was a physical pain she had not expected. She thought about her father. She thought about him clearly and deliberately, the way you think about something important when you need to stay steady. His hands, his voice, the way he had always introduced her first, before Lydia, before anyone. "This is my Briella," he would say, as if her name in his mouth was something worth presenting carefully. She thought about the night she had shifted for the first time, running through the territory woods in the dark, faster than she had believed possible, so free that the cold air felt like joy. She thought about coming back to find him on the porch. "There you are." She held that memory like a lantern in the dark cellar and breathed and breathed and breathed. Then the third hour came, and something her father had said a long time ago, something she had filed away in the part of her mind where children keep things they don't fully understand yet, surfaced from the bottom of her memory like something coming up for air. She had been 9 years old. They had been sitting at the edge of the territory woods on a warm evening, watching the pack wolves move through the trees in the distance. "Papa," she had asked, "what if I can't find him? What if the ceremony comes and I can't get to him?" Roland Finch had looked at her with the particular patience he reserved for questions that mattered. "The mate bond is not just a feeling," he said. "It is a channel. It runs both ways between you and your mate from the day the moon goddess ties the thread. If you are ever in danger, if you are ever trapped somewhere and your mate is close, you can push your need through the bond itself. Like sending a light down a dark tunnel. He will feel it. He will know something is wrong. He he will come. She had nodded, 8 words deep in understanding what he was saying. Does it always work? She had asked. It always works, he said, because the bond never lies, and because a true mate will always come. Briella opened her eyes in the dark cellar. She could feel him. She could feel him the way you can feel the sun even behind clouds, warm and specific and present, directly above her somewhere in that house. The thread between them was vibrating with a furious, frustrated energy she recognized as not entirely her own. He was looking for something. She could feel the shape of his searching even through stone and iron. She closed her eyes. She reached inward. She found the golden thread in her chest and grabbed it with both hands, not with her fingers, which were still in chains, but with something deeper than fingers, the part of her that her wolf lived in, the part her father had believed in even when she had not believed in herself yet. And she pushed. Every ounce of her fear, her hope, her desperate 7 years in the making need to be found. She gathered all of it and sent it blazing down the thread like fire along a rope. I am below you, I am in the cellar, I am here, please, please find me. The silence that followed lasted perhaps 4 seconds. Then the world above her head came apart. Harris had known something was wrong before the woman was even fully presented to him. He had known it, in fact, before he entered the pack house. The moment his vehicle crossed the Finch territory line and he rolled the window down to let the evening air in, it had hit him, a scent so specific and so certain that every other detail in the world went briefly irrelevant. Warm, cedar and something sweeter beneath it, like honey left in a warm room. The mate bond in his chest, which had been quiet for 31 years, with the patience of something that had always known it would eventually be answered, came fully, violently awake. His mate was in this territory, close, and she was already afraid. Baylor, his captain, had glanced at him from the driver's seat. Baylor had served Harris for 9 years and knew his silences well enough to read them. So, drive, Harris had said, and stay alert. He had walked into the Finch pack house with Armani at his left and Baylor at his right, and the scent had grown stronger with each step, threading through the house like a current he could follow with his eyes closed. His mate was close, somewhere in this building. He could feel the mate bond reaching toward her, could feel something on the other end of it, afraid and hopping and trying very hard to hold itself together. He had followed Pearl Finch to the altar room with the specific patience of a man who already knows the answer to a question and is simply waiting for the other person to catch up. Pearl was a composed woman. He had been told that, and he could see it was true. She had the kind of stillness that came from practice, from many years of deciding exactly what expression to wear before walking into a room. She smiled at him with genuine warmth and gestured to the young woman standing at the altar in white. Your Majesty, may I present my daughter, Lydia Finch? Harris looked at Lydia Finch for exactly 4 seconds. She was beautiful. He could register that the way you register a fact, clearly, without it meaning anything. She was standing with perfect posture in a white dress that did not quite fit right across the shoulders. She was smiling the smile of someone who had been told what expression to wear when they walked into this room. She did not smell like his mate. She smelled like rose soap and nerves and someone else's dress. This is not her, Harris said. The room went very still. Gregory, the pack elder standing ready with his ceremonial staff, blinked slowly. Pearl's smile did not move, which told Harris more than the smile itself. I beg your pardon, Your Majesty, Pearl said carefully. The woman standing in front of me is not my mate. Harris kept his voice even. Even was always more effective than loud. Loud people could be argued with, even people could not. I consent my mate in this building. She is not here at this altar. Where is she? He watched Pearl's strategy shift in real time behind her eyes. It was an impressive performance. He could admit that. She pivoted from confusion to gentle concern to the suggestion that perhaps the bond was simply unfamiliar to him, that he had never experienced it before and might be mistaking nerves for. I have been Alpha King since I was 23 years old, Harris said, and something in his voice made 2 of the pack witnesses take a quiet step backward. I have spent 8 years learning to trust what I sense. What I sense right now is that my mate is in this house, that she is afraid, and that no one in this room is telling me the truth. I will ask once more, where is she? The silence stretched 5 full seconds. Lydia was the one who broke it. She did not mean to. It was something small, just her eyes, moving toward the hallway door and back. A reflex, over in less than a heartbeat. But Harris had spent 8 years reading rooms full of people who did not want to be read, and the reflex was enough. He turned to Baylor. Search the house. Baylor moved without a word. He was back in 4 minutes, and the expression on his face when he reappeared in the doorway was the one Harris trusted most, the expression Baylor wore when he was very angry and working very hard not to let it show. He crossed to Harris and spoke quietly enough that Pearl could not hear. Cellar, sir, iron bolt on the door from the outside, and the chain brackets in the wall are new, the mortar around the bolts is fresh. Whoever put those in, put them in recently. Harris was very still for a moment, the kind of still that comes before something significant. Then the mate bond in his chest erupted. It was not a gentle pull this time. It was a wave of sensation that hit him behind the sternum like something thrown from a great height, fear and hope, and desperate, blazing need, all of it pouring through the bond from the other end, and underneath all of it, a voice that was not a sound, but felt like one, clear and real, and breaking his heart a little with how much it was trying. I am below you, I am in the cellar, I am here, please find me. Harris was moving before the feeling had fully registered in his mind. His body simply went, because that was what a mate bond did. It bypassed every rational process and spoke directly to the part of you that existed before rational thought. He heard Pearl say something behind him. He did not stop. He heard Lydia make a sound. He did not stop. He moved through the house toward the back, toward where Baylor had pointed, toward the cellar door, and the scent grew stronger and stronger and stronger with every step, and his chest was so full of something he did not have a name for that it was difficult to breathe through. The cellar door had a bolt on the outside, a thick, deliberate bolt, the kind you do not install on a cellar door by accident. Harris took the bolt in his hand and pulled. The door came with it. Briella heard the world above her come apart and scrambled to her feet. She had sent the call through the bond and then held herself very still, the way you go still after you have thrown something and are waiting to see where it lands. For 4 seconds the cellar was completely silent. Then the entire house seemed to exhale, a sound like nothing she had words for, low and full and resonant, something between a word and a force of nature, rolling through the walls and the floor and the stone itself. Every hair on her arms stood straight. Something crashed above her, something else followed. Footsteps, heavy, fast, purposeful, the kind that did not navigate around furniture but moved in a straight line regardless of what was in the way, crossed the house and then descended. Rapidly, the cellar door at the top of the stairs did not open. It came away from the frame with a sound like a tree coming down in a storm, the bolt and its housing tearing from the wood as if they had been pressed into paper. Light flooded the cellar from the doorway above. And silhouetted against that light stood the largest man Briella had ever seen. Tall, well over 6 feet, with the kind of build that came from something deeper than effort, like a wolf who had never fully left his animal nature behind even in human form. Dark hair slightly disordered, dark eyes that swept the cellar in a single second and found her immediately, with a precision that made her breath stop, because no one in 7 years had looked at her that specifically, as if she were the only thing in the room worth seeing. He came down the stairs in 5 steps and crossed the cellar floor in 4 strides, and his hands, warm, large, careful, reached for her face before they reached for anything else. They cradled her face gently, tilting her chin up so the light from the doorway fell across her features, and she felt through the bond the specific quality of his relief. It was enormous. He had been carrying it all the way down those stairs, and now it was landing on her like the first warm day after a long winter. And then the mate bond completed itself. It was not a gradual thing. It was the way a lock sounds when the right key finds it, one clean, final, decisive click, and then everything shifted. The frantic pulling in her chest resolved into something wide and settled, like a river reaching the sea. She gasped. He exhaled sharply. Both of them swayed, and his hand moved from her face to her waist with the automatic precision of someone catching something they cannot afford to drop. The chains, he looked at them with something in his expression that was very controlled and very dark. Then he put both hands on the links and pulled, and the iron gave like it had always been willing to give, had simply been waiting for the right person to ask. There was no key, there had never been a key. He simply pulled, and the chains came loose, and Briella's wrists were free, and she stood in the middle of her family's cellar with chain marks on her skin and dust on her dress and tears she had not noticed crying drying on her face. "You called to me," he said. His voice was rough at the edges, as if he had spent the last few minutes keeping it carefully composed and the effort had cost him something. "I didn't know if it would work," Briella admitted. Her own voice was raw from the hours of screaming, barely above a whisper. "It always works." He said it with such simple certainty that something inside her cracked open a little. Not painfully, more the way a window opens, the way something that has been sealed for a long time suddenly has air moving through it again. He was scanning her, not intrusively, methodically, the way someone looks at a thing they are responsible for and need to assess. His eyes moved over her wrists where the chain had been, over the tear on her shoulder seam, over her face and throat, and she could feel through the bond the running inventory he was taking and the particular quality of anger that was building underneath it. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "Only my pride," she said. It was almost a reflex, something she said the way people say they are fine when they are not completely fine, but are not willing to be the kind of person who says so. She expected him to accept it and move on. He did not accept it and move on. He looked at her for a moment with an expression that suggested he knew exactly what "only my pride" meant when someone said it in a cellar after being chained to a wall, and he was not going to pretend it meant nothing. "Your name," he said instead, quiet, almost careful, the way you ask for something you already know the value of. "Briella," she said, "Briella Finch." Harris, his jaw was tight, but his eyes on her were still gentle. "And you, Briella Finch, are exactly who I have been looking for." He said it simply, not like a declaration, like a fact he had known for some time and was only now getting the opportunity to say out loud. The mate bond hummed between them, warm and permanent, and Briella stood in the wreckage of her chains and felt, for the first time in 7 years, found. They came up the cellar stairs together, Briella's hand in Harris's. He did not pull her or rush her. He simply moved beside her with his hand wrapped around hers in the particular way of someone who was not planning on letting go, and she was grateful enough for that small steadiness that she did not find words for it. Some things did not need words yet. Some things were still too new to fit into sentences. The kitchen at the top of the stairs stopped her in her tracks. She had not heard all of it from the cellar, not the full scope of what had happened when Harris had moved through the house, but she could see it now. The cellar door lay in the corner of the kitchen in 3 pieces, the bolt housing still attached to a chunk of the door frame. A length of the wall beside the cellar entrance had cracked along a diagonal line from top to bottom, plaster dust still settling on the kitchen floor. A chair had been relocated several feet from where it had apparently started. Harris followed her gaze. He had the grace to look mildly acknowledging rather than apologetic. "I may have moved through the house quickly," he said. Briella looked at the cracked wall. She looked at the door in pieces. She thought about the fact that this man, the Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in all the territories, had moved through her family's home like something that could not be stopped and could not be redirected and had not been interested in trying, all to get to her. To a girl who had been invisible in this house for 7 years. Something shifted in her chest that was not the mate bond. It was something quieter, something of her own. Baylor appeared from the hallway, took one look at the two of them, and had the extraordinary professionalism to simply nod and step aside. They walked through the house toward the altar hall, and Briella's feet knew every floorboard by sound, every corner by memory. She passed the kitchen table, where she had always sat at the far end, away from the center. She passed the narrow hallway where Pearl had once made her wait outside during a family gathering because the room was too full. She passed the small side table where her father's other photograph, The one Pearl had moved off the main mantelpiece after he died, had sat in reduced dignity for 7 years. She reached for it without stopping and picked it up, just held it as they walked. Harris glanced at it. "Your father?" "Yes." A pause. "You have his eyes," he said quietly. He had seen exactly one photograph of Roland Finch in the time it took to cross a hallway, and he had noticed anyway. Briella filed that away in the new part of her chest that was already quietly collecting the things Harris did. Baylor fell into step beside Harris and spoke in a low voice. "The chain brackets in the cellar wall. I checked the mortar, sir, fresh, no more than 3 weeks old, and I found the supply receipt in the housekeeper's ledger." He held it out, a small folded paper, the kind shops gave you to confirm a purchase. Briella did not look at it. She did not need to. She had already understood, the moment she saw the chains, that they had been installed with planning. That the cellar had been prepared for her weeks before tonight. That Pearl had sat across from her at dinner for 3 weeks, knowing what waited downstairs. Harris took the receipt. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he folded it and placed it into his jacket pocket with the careful deliberateness of someone preserving evidence. They stopped in front of the hallway mirror. Briella had not intended to look. She simply glanced up, and there she was, the dust on her dress, the fraying at the shoulder seam where the fabric had caught on a chain link, the chain marks faintly visible on both wrists, her hair half undone from its braid. She looked like someone who had been through something, because she had. The instinct was immediate and old. Smooth it down, apologize for how she appeared, make it smaller, make herself smaller. She had been making herself smaller in this house since she was 15 years old, and some habits reached for you without permission. Harris stopped beside her. He looked at her reflection, not his own. "You look like someone who survived something," he said, low and plain and completely sincere. "That is not something to be embarrassed about. That is something to remember." Briella looked at her own face in the mirror for a long, steady moment. Then she straightened. She stood up to her full height, which she had been mildly rounding her shoulders away from for years, and felt the difference move through her spine like something unclenching. She did not look any different, but she felt different, like a door opening. Harris's hand tightened briefly around hers. "Ready?" he asked. She thought about 7 years of being the wrong twin, the inconvenient daughter, the complication. She thought about chains in a wall that had been installed for her specifically. She thought about her father on the back porch, about the thread in her chest, about the man standing beside her who had followed that thread through a house and through iron to find her. "Yes," she said. And she walked through the door into the room where Pearl was waiting. Every head turned when Harris pushed the door open. The altar hall held perhaps 30 witnesses, PAC members and their families, a handful of neighboring PAC representatives who had been invited for the occasion, Gregory, the PAC elder, standing near the altar with his ceremonial staff. All of them had been standing in various states of anxious murmuring when Harris had abruptly left the room 15 minutes earlier. Now they were very still. Pearl and Lydia stood near the altar. Pearl's composure was intact. That was what Briella noticed first. After everything, the composure was still perfectly in place, like a mask that had been worn so long it had forgotten it was a mask. Lydia stood slightly behind her, and her composure was not intact. She was pale and her hands were clasped too tightly, and she could not quite bring herself to look at Briella directly. That somehow was the thing that hurt most. Not Pearl, who had never pretended to love her equally, but Lydia, who had stood in that sitting room this morning and said nothing while their mother laid out her plan, who had put on Briella's dress and walked to Briella's altar and opened her mouth to claim Briella's future, and could not even look her in the eye about it now. Briella looked at her sister for exactly 1 second. Then she looked away. Harris led her to the center of the room and stood beside her in the particular way that made his position completely clear without requiring a word. Not in front of her, protecting her, beside her with her. His shoulder aligned with hers, his hand still in hers, his attention on Pearl. "I would like," he said quietly, "to understand what happened in this house tonight." Pearl spread her hands in the gesture of a woman with nothing to hide. "Your Majesty, I believe there has been a misunderstanding. Briella has always been." Briella was chained in your cellar, Harris said, not louder, quieter, with iron brackets that were installed 3 weeks ago. I have the purchase receipt. He touched his jacket pocket. I would like you to explain to this room, which contains 30 witnesses and a pack elder, why you made that purchase and what you intended it for. The composure flickered, just for a moment, like a candle flame in a draft. I was concerned, Pearl said carefully, that Briella would interfere. She has always been difficult, unpredictable. I made a decision, perhaps too extreme, to ensure the ceremony could proceed. You chained your own daughter to a wall so you could send a different daughter to stand at my altar. Harris's voice was still even, still quiet. He did not need volume. The room was already holding its breath, and you are describing that as a concern about interference. Briella is not. Pearl stopped, recalibrated. She has never been suited for something like this. Lydia is refined, trained. She is everything an alpha king should. She is not my mate, Harris said. Your daughter Lydia is not my mate. She does not carry the scent the moon goddess attached to my bond. She is not the woman I came here to find. And you knew that, when you planned this, because you put the wrong woman in chains and sent me an imposter. Something in Pearl's careful architecture finally gave. It did not give into tears or apology. It gave into something older and uglier, the thing that had always been underneath the composure, finally without enough cover to stay hidden. She looked at Briella. She was never supposed to be anything, Pearl said, and there it was, clean and plain, and said in front of 30 witnesses and a pack elder and the Alpha King himself. The thing she had lived by for 7 years, finally spoken out loud. She has never been the one this family was building toward. Roland may have believed otherwise, but Roland is gone. I have spent 7 years managing her, making sure she did not get in the way of the future I was creating, and I would do it again because Lydia deserved. Enough, Harris said at once. The room flinched. He let the silence after that word do the work that volume could not. Then he spoke, and his voice had the quality of something that had been decided long before tonight. Under pack law, interfering with a sacred mate bond is cause for banishment from the originating pack. Attempting to deceive an Alpha King during a formal ceremony carries the penalty of exile from all territories under royal protection. He turned to Baylor. Captain, escort Pearl Finch and Lydia Finch to the territory border. Sunrise deadline. Anything they cannot carry in 2 bags is forfeit. Lydia finally looked up. Her eyes found Briella's across the room, and for one moment Briella saw something in them that might have been genuine, not an apology, exactly, but the shape of one, the shadow where an apology would have been if Lydia was someone who could find her way to it. Then the guards were moving, and Pearl was turning with her spine rigid and her chin still elevated, every inch of her performance still in place, and Lydia followed her, crying quietly, and the door closed behind them both. The room was silent for a long beat. Then a woman at the edge of the crowd moved. Older, compact, with the kind of face that had taken many years to arrange itself into something settled. She crossed the room directly to Briella and took both of her hands before Briella had time to react. Clara, she had been a friend of Roland Finch's for 30 years. She had come to his funeral and sat in the front row and cried when Pearl had not. Your father used to say, Clara told her, low and even, so that it was only between the two of them, that you were the one who had his courage. He said it exactly like that, not bravery, courage, the kind that costs something. She held Briella's hands and did not let go. He was right. I should have said so years ago. Briella held it together for 3 full seconds. Then her eyes filled, and she let them, because she was Roland Finch's daughter, and he had taught her that some things were worth feeling fully. Harris's hand found the small of her back, steady, present, not crowding her just there. She breathed. The altar room was quiet now, settled after the storm of the last hour. Baylor's guards had righted the altar, while Harris and Briella were in the hallway. The ceremonial candles were relit, their flames burning straight and calm in the still air. The flower offerings had been straightened. Gregory stood at the head of the altar with his ceremonial staff in both hands, and his weathered face held an expression that Briella took a moment to identify. It was relief. The deep, particular relief of a man who has spent long enough in his profession to know the difference between a ceremony that is right and one that is not, and is finally presiding over the right one. Harris stopped in front of the altar and turned to address the room. We will now complete the altar ceremony between myself and my true mate, Briella Finch. His voice carried easily, warm and certain. If any witness has an objection to declare, speak now. Not a single voice rose. Several people were nodding. One old beater near the back wall, a man who had known Roland, who had watched Briella grow up invisible in her own house, pressed his knuckles briefly to his mouth and looked at the ceiling. Clara was holding her own hands together tightly, smiling at them. Armani, Harris's senior advisor, who had maintained perfect professional neutrality through the entire preceding chaos, had the small, satisfied expression of a man who had hoped things would turn out this way and was glad to be right. Gregory began. He had presided over Roland Finch's mating ceremony. He told them quietly before he started. He said it to Briella specifically, as if he thought she should know that. As if the ceremony tonight was connected to that one, threaded back to it through time and the moon goddess's particular patience. The vows were simple, 2 questions each. Do you accept? Do you choose? And then the witness and the sealing. Harris's answer was immediate. No hesitation, no performance, just the clean, unhesitating certainty of a man who had known exactly what he wanted from the moment he walked through a door and caught a scent in the air. Briella's voice, when her turn came, was clear. She had expected it to shake. She had spent 6 hours in a cellar being afraid, and her throat was still raw, and her wrists still bore the faint marks of iron, and she was standing at an altar in a torn white dress in front of 30 people who had watched her family keep her invisible for years. She expected her voice to carry all of that. It did not. It came out clean and certain, the way her wolf had always been when Pearl wasn't watching, the way she had always been, underneath the smallness she had taught herself to perform. I do, she said, and it rang across the room like something that had been waiting to be said for a very long time. Gregory raised his staff. What the goddess has joined, he said, his old voice steady and full, let no force come between. The mate bond in Briella's chest changed. She had felt it pulling and aching and straining for 6 hours. She had felt it confused and desperate and blazing with the effort of reaching across stone and iron towards someone it could not quite connect to. Now, at the moment Gregory's words fell over them both, it resolved, like a fist unclenching, like a breath finally drawn all the way in. The frantic energy settled into something wide and warm and permanent, the way a river settles when it finally reaches open water. She gasped, soft and involuntary. Harris caught it. His hand found her waist and steadied her, and she felt through the bond his own response to the sealing, something she could only describe as homecoming, the specific relief of a long search finally finished. He kissed her. He leaned toward her slowly, giving her all the time in the world, and when she rose to meet him the slowness ended. The kiss was warm and real, and then it was more than that, the kind that made the pack elder politely study his staff and the witnesses find somewhere else to look, and it was nothing like a performance and everything like a beginning. When they broke apart, both breathing somewhat unsteadily, Harris rested his forehead against hers. She could feel the smile on his face without seeing it. Mine, he said quietly, just that one word, exhaled more than spoken, as if he had been keeping it somewhere for a long time, and it was a relief to finally put it down. Briella leaned back far enough to look at him. Yours, she said, and then, because she was Roland Finch's daughter and her father had taught her that equal things were worth saying equally, and you are mine, that is how this works. The smile she had only felt a moment ago became visible, full and sudden and completely unguarded, and it transformed his face the way weather transforms a landscape, sweeping in and changing everything about the light. Several witnesses laughed softly. Someone in the back started a quiet, genuine round of congratulations that rippled through the room. Harris looked around the room once, then back at her. Would you like to stay here tonight? He asked, quiet just for her, or come to the palace? Briella looked at the altar hall. At the walls of the house she had lived in since she was 8 years old, the house where she had been invisible and insufficient and finally chained in a cellar because she had been too much of an inconvenience to manage any other way. She looked at the hallway door, at the side table where her father's photograph still sat, which she intended to take with her. "I don't want to spend another night here," she said, "no drama in it, just the plain, certain truth. This house stopped feeling like home a long time ago." "Then we go home," Harris said. He offered his hand. She took it. They walked out together into the night, and the summer air was warm on her face, and the stars were very bright overhead. And the royal carriages waited in the long drive with silver crests gleaming in the lamplight, and Briella Finch breathed in the night air and thought, "Oh, so this is what it feels like. This is what it feels like when a door opens." The inside of the carriage was warm and softly lit by a small lantern fixed to the wall, and it smelled like leather and night air, and faintly now like Harris, which the mate Bond registered with a satisfaction that was almost embarrassing. Baylor and Armani rode outside. The second carriage followed with the guard. Inside the first one, it was just the two of them, and the road, and the stars visible through the window, and the particular quiet that settles after a very long night when the urgent things are finally over and the real ones are just beginning. Briella sat with her father's photograph in her lap and her hands folded over it and looked out the window for a while without talking. She was not uncomfortable. She was simply full. The evening had left her somewhere past the capacity for clever conversation, and she had spent enough years performing the version of herself that others needed that she had learned to recognize the difference between a silence that needed filling and one that did not. Harris did not fill it. He sat beside her with the ease of a man entirely comfortable with quiet, and she was aware of him the way you are aware of a fireplace in a cold room, warmly, specifically, grateful for the specific nearness of him. After a while he said, "I felt the bond stir when I crossed your territory line." She turned to look at him. "Not gently," he continued. He was looking forward, not at her, as if the words were easier that way. "It woke up the way something wakes up when it has been waiting for a long time and has finally run out of patience. I had the window down and I caught your scent and everything else went quiet, all at once." He paused. "I have not told many people this, but I had begun to wonder. 8 years as Alpha King and no mate found. Some of my counsel were starting to suggest that perhaps my bond had been unusually delayed, or that perhaps," he stopped himself, "it does not matter what they suggested. The point is that I had begun to listen to them slightly more than I should have." "And then you drove through a territory and smelled someone," Briella said. The corner of his mouth moved. "And then I drove through a territory and smelled someone, and every doubt I had accumulated disappeared in approximately 4 seconds. She thought about that for a moment, when you walked in and saw Lydia. "I knew immediately," he said, no hesitation. "She did not smell like you. She was wearing your dress, I know that now, but the dress carries a faint trace of the person who wears it regularly, and underneath the ceremonial preparation and the nerves, it carried you, not her. I knew before she finished saying her name." Briella was quiet for a moment. Then she said something she had not entirely meant to say out loud. "No one has ever been able to tell us apart." "I imagine not," Harris said. "Most people use their eyes. Eyes can be fooled, scent cannot." He turned to look at her, and she felt the full weight of his attention the way you feel sunlight when a cloud moves off it, directly and warmly and all at once. "You will never be confused for someone else again, Briella, not by anyone who matters." That was not, technically, a romantic statement. It was a practical one. But the way he said it, with the flat, certain calm of someone stating a fact about how the world was going to be arranged from now on, hit her somewhere behind the ribs in a way she suspected was going to keep hitting her for a long time. She told him things then, piece by piece, not all at once, the way you share something you have been carrying alone when you are finally in the presence of someone with strong enough hands. She told him about her father, about the 15-year-old birthday that became a funeral, about Pearl's plan and how slowly and expertly it had been implemented, and how she had almost convinced herself it was normal, about the 7 years of making herself smaller, about the chains and the 3 hours in the cellar, and the memory of her father's voice that had surfaced in the third hour, like something the dark had been saving for her. Harris listened. He asked 2 questions the entire time she spoke. Both of them were about Roland, what he had been like, what he had taught her. The questions landed like a gift, like someone picking up the thing you carry and saying, "Tell me about this, I want to know what it weighs." Somewhere in the dark, without planning to, she leaned against his shoulder. She felt him go very still, the way you go still when something you did not dare reach for settles into your hands on its own. He did not move, he did not adjust her. He simply stayed exactly as he was, solid and warm, and after a moment his arm came around her shoulders with careful deliberateness, not pulling her closer, just present. An offer, not a demand. She let herself accept it. She had questions about the palace, about what being Lunar Queen would require of her, about pack politics and protocol, and all the things she had not been trained for because she had spent 7 years being made invisible instead. She started to list them, and Harris gently, firmly stopped her. "Not tonight," he said. "Tonight you have survived enough. The rest we learn together, starting tomorrow." "I have never been very good at leaving things for tomorrow," she admitted. "I know, I can tell. That is something else we have in common." She looked up at him. "What else do we have in common?" He considered. Stubbornness, a preference for plain truth over comfortable pretending, the particular kind of patience that does not come naturally but gets built over years of needing it. A pause. "And a father we lost too early, who left us carrying things we have been figuring out how to carry ever since." She had not expected that last one, "your father." "When I was 19, he said, simply. "Then, we have time for that story, we have a great deal of time." The palace appeared through the window then, and even in the dark, even in the distance, it was extraordinary. Towers rising clean against the stars, lit windows casting warm gold across the surrounding grounds, a complex of buildings and gardens and courtyards that seemed to have been placed there the way landmarks were placed, as if the land had always intended for it to be exactly there. Briella sat up straighter and looked at it for a long time without speaking. Harris watched her face watching the palace. She felt it, the way she felt everything from him now, through the bond, warmly and specifically. "It is real," she said, mostly to herself. "Yes," he said, "all of it." She pressed her hand flat to the window glass for just a moment, as if testing whether the night was solid. Then she settled back against his shoulder and let the carriage carry them toward the lights. The mate bond in her chest was quiet, not silent. It was never going to be silent again, she thought, but quiet in the way a house is quiet when all the right people are home, present, easy, like breathing. Like something that had always been there, finally allowed to be itself. 3 months, and the palace gardens had become the place Briella came when she needed to think. Not because they were grand, though they were. Roses climbed the stone walls in colors she had not known roses came in, and the paths between them were kept so carefully that they felt like rooms, private and particular, a different temperature than the rest of the world. She had learned the turns without intending to. Her feet simply knew the way now, the way feet learn any route they travel daily. She walked it on a clear morning in early summer, with a cup of tea going cold in one hand, and the easy, loosened posture of someone who had forgotten, gradually and completely, to make herself small. That was the change she had noticed most. Not the title, though Lunar Queen still occasionally stopped her mid-thought with its improbability. Not the clothes or the rooms or the particular quality of attention that a palace full of people gave to the woman who walked beside the Alpha King. Those things she had adjusted to with a speed that surprised her. What surprised her more was the posture, the way she had, sometime in the second month, stopped rounding her shoulders, stopped lowering her voice in rooms with more than 3 people, stopped the small constant internal calculation she had been running for 7 years, the one that asked, before she spoke or moved or took up space, whether it would make someone else look smaller by comparison. The calculation had simply stopped. She had not decided to stop it. It had just run out of reasons to run. The Finch Accord had helped. It was a formal interpack policy that she had drafted in the 4th week, in consultation with Armani and 3 neighboring pack alphas who had agreed to review it. The accord required independent witnesses at all altar ceremonies, wolf witnesses from outside the hosting pack, specifically so that no family could manage who was seen and who was not. It required documented consent from all eligible wolves before the ceremony and a sealed record delivered to the Alpha King's Council. It required that any wolf who had been prevented from attending a ceremony they were eligible for could bring their case before the Royal Council within 30 days. Harris had signed it into law without changing a single word. She had not expected that. She had prepared a defense of each clause, anticipating the places where political convenience might push back against it. He had read it, asked her 4 clarifying questions, and signed it. "Why no changes?" she had asked. "Because you were right about all of it," he said, "and because you wrote it better than I would have." He had looked up at her over the document. "You were not trained for this, and you are better at it than people who have been trained for nothing else for years. I want you to know I find that deeply satisfying." 4 neighboring packs had adopted it. Armani was calling it the Finch Accord in all official correspondence, and Briella had found out 3 weeks after the fact and felt something she did not have a single word for. Pride was part of it, but also something more tender than pride, something that had her father's name in it. She was on the 4th turn of the garden path, thinking about a packet of correspondence from the Eastern Territories she needed to review before noon, when she heard Harris behind her. She knew his step. She had learned it the way you learn the particular sound of a voice that matters to you, quickly, without trying, so thoroughly that it was eventually indistinguishable from just knowing. "There you are," he said. She turned. He was crossing the garden from the side entrance that connected to the council chambers, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbow, the working version of him, the real one she had come to know. He had the look of a man who had been in a room with complicated people for several hours and was glad to be out of it. She felt the mate bond respond to him the way it always did, that particular warmth spreading from the center of her chest outward. "How was council?" she asked. "Long." He fell into step beside her, their shoulders aligned automatically. They had both noticed, at some point in the 2nd month, that they walked at exactly the same pace and found it absurdly satisfying. Territorial boundary dispute, 2 lesser alphas, both of them completely certain the other started it. 3 hours. He glanced at her. "How was your morning?" "Productive. The Eastern Territory correspondence needs a response before the weekend. I have drafted one, but there is a section on the trade agreement that I want your eyes on before I send it." She paused. "Also, the Northern Pack representative is coming next week, and he prefers to meet in the morning, which means rescheduling your Thursday council. Armani knows." Harris was looking at her with the expression she privately thought of as the one that was going to keep making her cheeks warm for the rest of her life. A specific, warm, completely unself-conscious attention that still sometimes caught her off guard even after 3 months. "You rescheduled my Thursday council," he said. "The Northern representative's comfort with the palace schedule will significantly improve our chances of reaching favorable terms on the boundary agreement," she said. It was the practical decision. "It was exactly the right decision," he said. "You did not need my input. I still want your eyes on the trade section." "You will have them." He took the cup of cold tea gently from her hand, looked at it, and handed it back. "After we find you a warm one." She laughed, brief and genuine, and he smiled hearing it the way he always smiled hearing it, like it was something worth the effort of making happen. They walked. The garden was in its full summer state around them, roses and early honeysuckle making the air heavier and sweeter than the rest of the palace. Somewhere above the wall, a bird was performing an extended and very satisfied solo. "I received news from the Border Patrol this morning," Harris said after a while. Briella already knew from his tone what kind of news it was. Pearl. She attempted to cross back into the territory last week, was turned away at the eastern checkpoint. He kept his voice even. She appreciated that he always gave her the information without loading it with his own reaction, left her space to have her own first. The patrol also reports that she has been speaking to packs in the neighboring regions, telling a version of events that places her rather more sympathetically. What version? The one where I was deceived by you, where the bond was manipulated somehow, or the ceremony improperly conducted, where she was simply a mother trying to protect her daughter from a situation she was not equipped for. A pause. She has apparently been quite committed to this version. Briella considered that for a moment. The old instinct was to feel the injustice of it sharply, to want to correct it, to be afraid of what people would believe. She noticed the instinct and set it aside. What do we do about it? She asked. Nothing, Harris said. The Finch Accord is active in 4 territories. Any pack that looks into the matter seriously will find the documented record of what happened here, including the purchase receipt for the chain brackets and the witness statements. People who choose to believe Pearl's version were unlikely to have been our allies regardless. He glanced at her. And people who know you, who have worked with you these last 3 months, are not going to believe it. She thought about that. About the pack members who wrote her letters now, real ones, about real things, wolves in difficult situations asking if the Finch Accord applied to their circumstances, packs requesting guidance on how to implement the witness protocol. About Amani, who had started calling her ma'am with complete sincerity somewhere in the 6th week and had been unironic about it ever since. About Clara, who had been invited to the palace and had cried a little during the garden tour and then collected herself and given Briella 3 pieces of extremely practical advice about the Eastern Territories that turned out to be entirely correct. No, she agreed, I suppose they won't. They stopped at the garden mirror, a decorative one, bordered in climbing roses, tucked at the meeting of 2 paths. Briella glanced at it out of habit, the way she had learned to do on this walk. She barely recognized the woman looking back, not because she looked different, because she was holding herself differently, completely, fundamentally differently from the woman in the cellar 3 months ago, or the woman at the back of every pack gathering for 7 years before that, or the girl who had spent 15 years learning to round her shoulders so she took up less space. Head level, shoulders settled, the posture of someone who had somewhere to be and was going there. Harris came to stand beside her as he sometimes did on this path. He did not look at himself, he looked at her. Do you remember, he said, in the carriage the first night, you told me you did not feel extraordinary. I remember. Do you still feel that way? She looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment. She thought about the Finch Accord, about the Eastern correspondence, about the pack members who wrote her letters, about 3 months of waking up in a palace and not being a complication, about a man who had torn iron off a wall because a bond told him she was there and had spent 3 months proving, in small and daily ways, that the bond had been right. No, she said quietly, I really don't. Harris turned her toward him, his hands warm on her shoulders, and looked at her the way he had looked at her in the cellar, specifically and completely, as if she were the only thing in the frame. I have been trying to find the right moment to tell you something for approximately 6 weeks, he said, and I have come to the conclusion that I have been overthinking it, which is unlike me, and is entirely your fault for being someone I apparently lose my practical instincts around. Briella felt something warm and nervous begin in the center of her chest. Harris. I love you, he said. Plain and direct, and without any of the ceremony that the words sometimes got dressed up in by people who were less certain of them. Not because the bond requires it, because you are brave in the specific way that costs something, which your father apparently also knew about you before I did. Because you drafted a piece of law in your 4th week, in a palace you had never been to, and it was better than legislation my experienced counsel has produced in years. Because you laugh when you are actually amused and not when you are merely being polite. Because in the carriage on the first night, you put your head on my shoulder and pretended you had not done it, and I thought, there she is. That is who she is, and I have been in love with who she is ever since. Briella stood in the garden in the full summer morning, with roses climbing the walls on all sides of her, and a bird still performing its solo somewhere overhead, and her mate standing in front of her looking at her like she was specifically and irreplaceably the right person. And she thought about 7 years of being the wrong twin, the inconvenient daughter, the complication that needed managing. She thought about 3 months of being the right one. I love you too, she said, clear and steady and certain. I have been in love with you since you pulled iron off a wall with your bare hands and then asked me if I was all right before you did anything else. Which was, I should tell you, deeply unfair timing, because I was covered in cellar dust, and my dress was torn and I had been crying for 2 hours, and you looked at me like she stopped. Like I was the answer to something, she finished quietly. Like finding me was the thing the rest of it had been for. It was, he said, simply, completely, in the way he said everything true. He kissed her in the garden, in the morning, with full summer light falling on them both, and nothing hiding either one of them from view. She kissed him back with her whole self, not the version she had learned to perform, not the version she had made small enough to avoid outshining anyone, her whole self, openly, in the sunlight. When they broke apart, she was smiling. He was smiling. Somewhere on the other side of the garden wall, the bird reached the finale of its performance and went quiet, apparently satisfied. I have a question, Briella said. Ask it. The receipt, the one Baylor found in the cellar, you kept it. It is in the Royal Archive now, official evidence in the case record. I know, but you kept it on you all evening, through the confrontation, through the ceremony, through the carriage ride. She tilted her head. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Because I wanted to make certain it was not lost, he said finally, before the law had seen it, before the witnesses had confirmed it, before there was a formal record, a beat. I wanted to make certain that what was done to you was not, he paused, choosing, was not made smaller by time or circumstance, that it remained exactly as large as it was. She looked at him. Thank you, she said, for that, for all of it. She reached up and touched his jaw briefly, not dramatically, just a touch, the kind that had become ordinary between them in the best possible way, for breaking down the door. That was the easy part, he said. It was iron bolted into stone. I mean it was the easy part because it was the part where I knew exactly what I was doing and exactly why. The hard part, he said, was the years before, not knowing where you were or when I would find you, or whether, he stopped himself. The door was nothing. The door took 4 seconds. The waiting was the hard part. She understood that. She had done her own version of the waiting, though she had not known who she was waiting for. She had waited through 7 years of Pearl's house, through the slow erasure of every quality that made her herself, through 3 hours of iron and dark and altar drums, and the waiting had been the hard part, yes. And then it was over, and she was here, and he was here, and the bond between them was settled and warm and permanent. They walked back toward the palace together, her hand in his, the summer morning opening around them. She caught her reflection one more time in the garden mirror as they passed it, caught it and looked at it for just a moment, the woman she was now, upright and settled, and going somewhere specific, going somewhere she had chosen and that had chosen her back. She thought about her father on the back porch, watching her come home from her first run in the dark. There you are, he had said. She understood that now, finally, completely, in her whole body and not just her mind. The running had not been the point. The coming home had been the point. The being found had been the point. She had spent 22 years becoming someone. She had spent the last 3 months discovering that she had always been her, and that being her, fully, loudly, without apology, without rounding her shoulders and moving to the back of the room, was not a problem to manage. It was the whole point. Ready, Harris asked, at the palace door. She looked at the door, at the palace beyond it, at everything waiting for her inside. The correspondence, the pack letters, the Eastern Territories and the Northern representative, and the 1,000 daily acts of building something that mattered. Yes, Briella Finch said, and she walked through. Thank you so much for watching. Where are you watching from? I would love to meet you in the comments. If this story moved you, please subscribe. It is free, and it helps more people find these stories. Until next time.